talk a little bit right now about what's going on with the Postal Service. Because there's a big debate happening on the countryside, or across the country rather, about the post office, funding the post office with additional money, billions of dollars that Democrats want in particular. Nancy Pelosi now wanting Louis DeJoy, the recently installed Postmaster General, who comes from the private sector, to go before a House committee and provide testimony. It's some urgent affair, as though getting money for the post office is the panacea that will ensure mail ballots work great and that every state in the union will be able to jump in if they want to. That's the impression that you're getting. On Friday, we spoke with former Colorado Secretary of State Wayne Williams, who was Secretary of State for Colorado, the third state to implement a statewide vote-by-mail system from 2015 to 2019. We also spoke with Matt Crane, former clerk and recorder of Arapahoe County, Colorado, who was clerk from 2013 through 2019. Now, both Williams and Crane were county clerks during 2013 when voters decided to move forward with the switch to vote by mail, in 2014 when it was first implemented. That is a pretty important insight that they can bring, the experience of how we got there in Colorado, where I'm broadcasting from, and how it developed over time. Well, Matt Crane, one of the points he said is that throwing money at the post office or throwing money to states for vote by mail isn't the panacea that people think it is. And yet the Democrats are trying to paint this picture twofold. Number one, President Trump is out to get the post office. Not just because of elections, but in general, he's out to get the post office, and it's going to harm Americans. And all the problems we see with the post office are just the result of President Trump doing some sort of full-throated effort to get at the USPS. That's number one. Number two, if only we can make sure that the post office gets money so they can move ballots quickly, that's going to solve all of the problems. That is nonsensical. Let's take point number one about the United States Postal Service. The reality about the post office is that it is bleeding money. And it has been bleeding money for years. The only reason that the United States Postal Service is alive today is because of packages. But even then, it is still taking losses, significant losses. In 2019, so last year, the United States Postal Service, trying to find the data here, the United States Postal Service last year lost $9 billion. Took a $9 billion net loss, $8.8 billion in fiscal year 2014 or 2019, despite a $514 million increase in operating revenue. And as of the end of last year, it was on track to run out of cash by 2024. Many other countries have privatized their postal services, something we will explore later on this program, another day. They've privatized their postal services because of the costs and challenges involved. In fact, in 2001, now Democratic governor of Colorado, former congressman from Colorado, then Secretary of Education, a member of the Board of Education in Colorado, Jared Polis, wrote a paper for the Independence Institute in which he endorsed privatizing the USPS in 2001. Liberal Democratic governor, now today, Jared Polis endorsed privatizing the Postal Service. The reality is it is a loss, a massive loss all the time. That is the definition of the Postal Service. There need to be reforms without any question. And Louis DeJoy, the Postmaster General, is bringing a private sector mindset and trying to figure out the cost. Now, the timing of this and the language that President Trump has used are what is stirring these concerns that I think are vastly overstated. When it comes to the post office, it is an ineffective service financially. Yes, it gets things from place A to place B. It traces its roots back to 1775 with Benjamin Franklin making it possible for the insurgents in the American colonies to communicate with one another and share postage and so forth, get mail from one location to another. It traces its roots back. It's a significant institution. But the problem is that now it is a giant loser financially. No matter what they've done, it has not improved its viability. And the United States government, federal government, should not simply use taxpayer dollars to bail it out. Given the financial constraints already endured by the Postal Service last year, $9 billion loss, you can't just think, oh, if we give money to the Postal Service, that's going to make sure not only that vote by mail works better, but also that the post office is a more vibrant entity. That's just not reality. The financial data does not lie, and we have years and years of it, decades of information. The only thing, again, keeping the post office afloat is package delivery. And guess what? There's a lot more competition in package delivery than mail, where they have a monopoly on mail delivery. You cannot do mail, traditional mail, through UPS or FedEx. Now, the messaging from President Trump is where I do think that there's reason for concern. Let's go to cut 8. This is Rahm Emanuel, former congressman, former chief of staff for Barack Obama when he was president, and also former mayor most recently of Chicago. And here's the message that he was putting forward that, in his view, Democrats should express on the post office.
George, I think this is all true, but I think the Democrats need to redirect their message. You haven't gotten your medicine through the mail? Donald Trump. That's the problem. You haven't gotten your Social Security check and you're going to miss your mortgage payment, or you're going to miss some benefit for your health care costs? Donald Trump's your problem. The Republicans are the problem. Voting is about us in the election. It is about the democracy.
It's about people's rights.
Yeah, no, exactly. But if you want to, right now, this is tied up on the entire package in Congress. You want to put pressure on getting the Republicans to negotiate, which they are refusing to do now until Labor Day? Change the message to something that's relevant to the American people today, not 3 months. And so So
Rahm Emanuel saying, hey, let's put all the blame on President Trump, even though it does not belong there. Now, this is where President Trump needs to be more careful with his words. Because, hey, Nathan, do we have that clip? I think it was cut 3 from Friday with President Trump the other day when he was talking. It's a short clip, Fox News or Fox Business interview, where President Trump talks specifically about the post office and funding the post office and vote by mail and so forth, where I think it was an unforced error in terms of helping to set the stage for Democrats to make this bogus line of attack. And it is a bogus line of attack. They were already seeing issues with mail earlier this year. In fact, when it comes to the announcements regarding these letters that just went out to 46 states, warning them about the challenges with vote by mail, the letters were actually planned well before the current Postmaster General was installed. It was a May letter originally posted to USPS.com by the USPS General Counsel, Thomas Marshall. This is the one that says, quote, that the states and their deadlines, they were warning states that their deadlines, quote, for requesting and casting mail-in ballots are incongruous with the Postal Service's delivery standards. He also said, quote, to account for delivery standards and to allow for contingencies, example, weather issues or unforeseen events, voters should mail their return ballots at least 1 week prior to the date. And the same rule, he added, should apply to blank ballots. Quote, the Postal Service also recommends that state or local election officials use first-class mail and allow 1 week for delivery to voters. That was before we had a wide-scale mass discussion about vote by mail. That's before President Trump really started harping on vote by mail and expressing his understandable criticisms and concerns, rather, that we discussed on Friday on this program. But even more importantly, it's exactly right. Colorado has been using, as we've talked about, vote by mail statewide since 2014. We have done a presidential election cycle with it. We have done 2 midterm elections with it. And we have done 3 off-year, odd-year elections with it. We have a thing or two to say from our own experiences about vote by mail. And one of the things is that, yes, the Postal Service is not perfect. In November of last year, ballots showed up on Election Day for 828 voters in Arapahoe County, Colorado. And that's because the current clerk and recorder, Joan Lopez, didn't pay for first-class postage and didn't set up ballot tracking. So election ballots didn't show up to these voters until Election Day. Now, many of them were able to go access their ballot in another way. They were able to show up at a polling station and vote in person, for example. They might have been able to request absentee. But still, she didn't pay for first-class postage, decided to go for the bulk rate, I think, and it didn't get there in time. I mean, I guess it did because it got there on Election Day, but it was supposed to get there in advance. Now, these were replacement ballots that were requested by these voters, but they should have gotten there more quickly. The point is that you cannot simply count on the United States Postal Service to do it simply by giving money. Colorado's the third state to implement vote by mail. Not many states have been doing this kind of thing. And even with that, you still have some troubles. Because election officials need to be prepared themselves. So here is the fundamental point. This is the most important point relative to this whole discussion of vote by mail. The Democrats are trying to scapegoat other issues with a VBM system by pointing to a lack of funding to the Postal Service, by pointing to President Trump and his administration taking certain steps that were unrelated to what we're seeing with the expansion of vote by mail across the country. There are many problems with rushing vote by mail. We talked about this on Friday. A heck of a lot of states are not remotely prepared and ready for this burden. And so Democrats are looking and they're saying, hey, this is the source of the problem. It's Donald Trump. Your medication's coming in late. Your ballot's not getting there on time. Donald Trump, Louis DeJoy, trying to destroy the Postal Service. That's not true at all. It's not remotely true. And actually, yesterday on ABC This Week, Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, had a very important statement to make in Cut 7 about the readiness of county clerks around the country, in New Jersey, his home state, and elsewhere, and their readiness to handle the influx of these mail ballots. Take a listen.
Listen, the more important issue here, again, is to understand the rationale for this. In states all over the country, state governments are failing to have motor vehicles opened, having other agencies open where people are waiting in line to get their unemployment checks, waiting in line to get their motor vehicles registered or their licenses. they allow that to occur. But somehow waiting in line to exercise the most precious vote you have every 4 years for President of the United States, somehow it can't be done, and we have to try to do a universal mail-in system when the post office isn't ready for it. But more importantly, George, the county clerks aren't ready for this across this country to process all of these ballots in a timely fashion. George, you'll notice that Yvette did not answer the question about county clerks. This isn't about the post office. I'm assuming that the post office will get it to a county clerk on time. In New York, in New Jersey, in Georgia, run by Republicans and Democrats at the county level. They don't have the capacity to do this. They don't have the machines to process them fast enough. In Oregon and Washington, they do because they've taken years to put a universal mail-in system in place. This is not the right thing to do for our democracy. And if Yvette is really concerned about our democracy, if she's an acolyte of the Al Gore years where every vote must be counted, well, then we shouldn't do this on the fly. We need to do this in a smart way.
What's wrong with every vote being counted?
In New Jersey, people are standing every vote should be counted, George, but it won't be counted, at least not counted till December or January if we go to universal mail-in voting, because the county clerks in all the counties across this country do not have the equipment to be able to get this done, and they can't get that equipment between now and November 3rd. It's impossible.
Thank you, Chris Christie. Former governor of New Jersey getting it exactly right, and President Trump and his administration and his campaign and all Republicans across the country should watch two things. One, our show on Friday with Wayne Williams, former Secretary of State for Colorado, and Matt Crane, former clerk and recorder for Arapahoe County, Colorado, which was very informative. It was tremendously informative and very valuable. But also just that clip alone from Chris Christie, who got it exactly right. From the beginning, they shouldn't have been saying this broad brush, vote by mail is horrible and it's going to lead to fraud. They should say, county clerks are not ready for this. The systems are not in place to make this work effectively. And fraud can happen if you rush it and you do it wrong. For example, not requiring signature verification. Secretary Williams made the point on Friday about how the Democrat bill in the House of Representatives would forbid any signature verification requirements across the country, including the ones that have made Colorado a hallmark, as the Washington Post once called it, with the safest election in the country. Paraphrasing there, but safest was the word that they used to describe Colorado's elections. That's the point that we should be raising everywhere, is not vote by mail broadly is a problem. Then if it works in some states, then people will be able to say, well, it actually works in some states. And then others can say, oh, well, it doesn't work in some states. It was a problem. It's just a mess. And it's a messaging mess too. From the start, the Trump administration, President Trump and the campaign, to the extent the campaign's even talking about this, should have said, look, we got to be smart in this regard. It can work. It works in Colorado, Oregon, Washington, but countless states are not prepared. And look, folks, ballots need to be printed starting next month. If states are not ready, then they are not ready, and they should not do it and should not give false hope and then allow Democrats to just blame the United States Postal Service being undercut by President Trump, because that's not what's going on here. And unfortunately, the messaging has predominantly set that up. So Republicans need to start following what we've been saying on this program and what Chris Christie was saying on ABC this week, and underscoring the preparedness and the technology and the systemic reasons why states across this country are not ready to move forward. And it is not simply a Postal Service issue by any stretch of the imagination. Is the Postal Service ready for the influx of mail ballots? Probably not, because this has never been tried before. But that's the least of the problems here. We need an honest discussion about the post office and vote by mail. Unfortunately, most places aren't having it. We will continue to do so here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. You just watched a clip from Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't miss more engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel today. You want to catch our live show. And I love your support.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.
Awesome.